to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
And my name is Matt.
And today's episode, we have another TV special for you. Today we are looking at Doctor Who, and we've got a very special guest to help us out with this chat today. We've got film and TV critic. I remembered this time. And last time we got her on, I missed out the TV critic bit. We have Rhianna Dhillon joining us on the show.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Rhianna. It's great to have you back on.
Well, thanks for having me back on after the last time.
Important to caveat the TV string to your bow because you're becoming our resident TV expert. Last time we got you on, we were talking about Battlestar Galactica and Westworld. We don't do a lot of TV on the show.
Oh, don't you? Well, I think that, the TV thing, the TV moniker is quite new for me as well, actually, because I've only done it properly as a critic since I started on Six Music, which was only a couple of years ago. So you are forgiven for not remembering that. Also, since I was last on, I have adopted two baby bunnies and I have called them Apollo and Starbuck.
That's two separate but excellent decisions you've made there.
That's so good. I'm guessing it was just because you did the podcast episode of us and you were so sort of like, that had such a lasting memory for you. You had to name the bunnies after. Yeah, that's it.
That's exactly what it was. I mean, I can't even remember why what that was even about. Who are those characters? What are they from? It was just the podcast, guys.
I imagine the BBC putting the entire series of Battlestar Galactica on iPlayer might have had some influence on that as well.
I mean, I've watched it like 5 times. The BBC has got nothing on this.
So today you're joining us to talk about Doctor Who then, Rhianna. Are you a big Doctor Who fan?
Yeah, I've always loved Doctor Who. I mean, I've loved the newer series, as in I've never watched the old ones with the original Doctors. So Christopher Eccleston was my first Doctor, and I've loved it ever since. I was blown away. I just think it's an incredible programme, and it was such a treat to go back and see some of them for this episode. I'd forgotten just how much I loved it and how much I used to cry in all of the episodes. I've just wept all through all of them today.
Yeah, that's a big thing that comes out from the new series of Doctor Who, and definitely rewatching these episodes, is that there's a lot of emotion all of the time, and it's a real theme of Doctor Who. I'm the same as you. I did watch some of the original Doctor Who when I was young, but I can't remember it at all. So I don't know if that kind of level was there in the older episodes, but it runs through these episodes very strongly.
So we've all been away and we've watched 5 episodes of Doctor Who, which are all specifically about time travel. So the ones we're going to be talking about today, in case you haven't seen them, are Father's Day, Blink, Angels Take Manhattan, The Girl in the Fireplace, and A Christmas Carol. So there's quite a selection of time travel stories in there. So it's going to be good fun chatting about these.
Yeah, we just tried to get a range of basically good episodes, but focusing on good episodes that do include time travel. But I did realise when we were trying to pick these episodes out, that's really hard to do with Doctor Who because it's a time travel show.
Because they all involve time travel. I kind of thought that when you asked me to be on it and you're like, we're looking for specific episodes about time travel. I was like, have you seen the show? I mean, but I did then, when you told me which episodes you were talking about, I realised exactly what you meant in terms of just like very specifically about the effects within an episode that time travel can have rather than just time travelling.
Yeah, and annoyingly, my all-time favourite episode of Doctor Who, I don't think it's got any time travel in it at all. It's Midnight. It's the one where the Doctor's like on his own, stuck on a bus, and there's like an alien that's invisible and possesses people. And I think they get there. They obviously get there in the TARDIS at the start of the episode. But apart from that, I don't think there's any time travel at all. And it's insane how good it is. But
it's like a bottle episode, isn't it?
Yeah, like a bottle episode, and it's like a Twilight Zone episode. And it's kind of like The Thing as well, and it's so intense and so good.
It's creepy as fuck. Leslie Sharp's in it, and she can be very creepy when she wants to be. When she's possessed by some weird alien on this fantastic planet made out of diamonds, it is insane and terrifying.
It's a great episode, but let's talk about time travel in Doctor Who. So the first one that we've got queued up for this conversation is Father's Day from the very first series, Christopher Eccleston's first and only series, Series 1, Episode 8.
So I was thinking, could we go and see my dad? when he was still alive.
Where's this come from all of a sudden?
All right, then, if we can't, if it goes against the laws of time or something, then never mind, just leave it.
No, I can do anything. I'm just more worried about you.
I want to see him.
Your wish is my command. But be careful what you wish for.
What did you guys think watching this one back?
It was weird seeing Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor again. Like, I haven't seen him in that role for so long. There was like a bit of a disconnect for me because he's quite a dark Doctor, isn't he?
Yes, he's quite intense and weird, isn't he?
He is. I don't think he's as dark as like Peter Capaldi though. I think I think he does quite a nice thing of laying the groundwork for what's to come with the quirkier Doctors, like with David Tennant. But you're right, he does have an edge, which is... He does show a little bit in this episode. There were some things that I was like, I wouldn't have expected the Doctor to do that or to say that to Rose especially, or why is he blaming her for something that is pretty much entirely his fault? And things like that, which I was quite surprised about. It was like they were still sort of finding their feet a little bit about his ethos, I think.
Yeah, he's very snappy and short-tempered, particularly with Rose. And yeah, you're right, it does lay that groundwork. I think it's a shame that Eccleston didn't get longer to go down both of those sides of the Doctor, the wacky side and the creepy loner side. But he's definitely showing it, yeah. Well, he is a bit of a creepy loner, and he's 900 years old, and he's got a bit of a thing for hanging out with like 20-year-old women.
But that loner thing all comes from his time travel, doesn't it? Because he is so separate from everybody else in his perception of time and the way that he lives. He's constantly surrounded by different companions who only live a finite amount of time. So I think that's where he's such an interesting case for time travel in particular, because he's like the eternal man and he can go to any point in time whenever he wants, but he is like continuously lonely, isn't he?
I think also that when you sort of think he'd be used to dying or regenerating at least by now. And there are times when he really doesn't want to let go of like his body. Or I think, especially when David Tennant regenerates into Matt Smith, like that. Do you remember when he's sort of saying it's not time, like I'm not ready kind of thing. And it's just so incredibly upsetting because it's like he has to restart his whole personality over again each time as well within it. So although he's got all of these memories and attachments or whatever, they do obviously seem to differ and change a little bit each time. And he has to lose something in the same way that we lose something with a different actor, I suppose.
I think it's losing the actor that drives that a little bit. I would actually really like to see a regeneration that's just played really casually, like he's lived hundreds and hundreds of years in one of his bodies and he's just like, okay, time for a new one, and he's just fine about it. But that would be doing a disservice to the actor because they've been playing the role hopefully for a few years, the audience is really attached, and you have to make it like a main character has died. It's got to have that impact on the audience. And
main characters dying is sort of like the focus of this episode, isn't it? Because Rose's dad died when she was a kid, and she's constantly sort of like had all these sort of memories and thoughts about what it would have been like to grow up with her dad around. And she suddenly gets this opportunity to go back in time and reverse that, doesn't she?
Yeah, well, she requests the opportunity to just go back and see her dad. But the emotions of that moment take over and she ends up doing something that she wasn't supposed to do, which is go and save him and stop him from being killed by the car. It's a kind of a classic like saving someone story. We've seen this in other time travel stories where you get the opportunity. Would you go back and save someone from dying? And should you go back and save someone from dying? And the Doctor's opinion is no, you can't do that. That's against the rules.
Except he breaks those rules like over and over again himself whenever it pleases him. But for Rose, it's like, I'm just going to dangle this in front of you and, oh yeah, go be with him in his dying moments because, that would be a really nice thing for you and not at all traumatic. And no, don't try and save him because then you're going to split the universe apart. And it's just like, what? Why? Where are these rules coming from? It's like you're pulling them out of your arse at this point. But it is that whole be careful what you wish for thing, because of course I think everybody would wish for that sort of scenario, and I think they do quite a good thing. They go back on it, don't they, later in the series, but they do quite a good thing where they're like, if he doesn't die now, he has to die later, because it's just not possible to bring him back in this way, which I think is quite important in a time travel series.
Yeah, totally. You've got to have stakes, haven't you?
Yeah.
And we've seen that in other films where, you can't just get in the time machine and just easily fix a problem because it's just not a compelling narrative on screen.
Yeah, and it just has a snowball effect every time. And sort of like, if you do one thing, it changes something else. And then you get more and more problems come out of that.
But it's interesting what you said about how he breaks the rules whenever he wants. That's another theme that keeps coming up in the subsequent series of Doctor Who, and it matches up nicely with a lot of the films that we've been looking at this series, because we talked a lot about how each time travel film has to come up with its own set of rules and then stick to those rules. It doesn't really matter what they are, but you've got to set them and stick to them. But Doctor Who's been running for, what's the cumulative total, like 40 years or something on screen or more. It's very hard to have a consistent set of rules across that. So him breaking every rule that he ever comes up with is important to make it sustainable, and just being vague about what those rules actually are that he has to abide to.
We all know that in any kind of entertainment universe, it is just for entertainment, right? And so you're always going to get people who are going to be cross about the fact that this doesn't line up with what you said 20 years ago or 5 episodes ago or whatever. In the same way, like the Harry Potter universe, when you've just got like all of these gaping holes because it's just come from someone's brain, they've made it up, it's not real. So that's like, I always have to keep reminding myself when thinking about the rules of Doctor Who, because ultimately it's for our entertainment and it is all made up, and time wouldn't necessarily work in a linear, normal way, and breaking one rule in one aspect might change everything in the future. So it's just about being open to that, I guess.
And a lot of the sort of Doctor Who episodes are because they're episodic, they can go and have an adventure sort of like in Victorian times, do loads of stuff, and then it has no effect on the future. And it's just like you said, it's the entertainment value. You've got to have a show like that where you can sort of play around with stuff like that. But I think Doctor Who as well, sometimes it ups the ante on certain things. Like this episode in particular, because like it's quite an emotional episode. It's a big sort of thing for Rose going back and meeting her dad and having that opportunity to save him. It kind of like, they can sort of up the ante on different episodes and stuff. And it's fun to see how they sort of play with that, how they sort of suddenly add in those stakes. And like the alien creatures in this, like, are a weird one as well. What they call Reapers.
Yes.
Reapers or Reavers or something, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the only time they ever appear in Doctor Who, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that happens
because
a lot.
They're shit.
Yes.
because they're not very, like, you just don't buy that these enormous bat things would appear. Like, I get rifts in and like, tearing like the fabric and all of that kind of stuff. And I love, like, later on when you have like the crack appear and it gets bigger, and that's a whole thing in itself. The crack in the wall is one of the most terrifying villains, if you like, of the Doctor Who universe. And then you have these bats, and you just can't believe it or buy that would happen, even in the Doctor Who universe. It's just bizarre, right?
Yeah, I think it's because like this idea of damaging the space-time continuum is such a vague thing, or at least very, very hard to conceptualize and certainly hard to visualize on screen, that you have to have these more vague metaphorical things like the TARDIS has bounced off a mysterious cloud of time energy, or there's a shining crack in the universe, stuff like that. It just inherently works better than saying like, you damaged the timeline and now there's big bats flying around killing everyone. It doesn't. There's too much of a leap there to make that make sense, isn't it?
Yeah. I quite like the fact that he called them like time bacteria or something, and they're trying to sort of like fix the wound. I like that as an idea, but then I think it comes down to budget as well with this episode, because it was one of the early ones from the new series when they relaunched it. You can tell the CGI is pretty bad. And then like later on when I was watching these other episodes, you can see how massively the budget has jumped up in Doctor Who. And that was sort of like really eye-opening to properly see the difference between sort of now and then.
And also technology, I guess, as well, just in that sort of period, because there was, you know, a good few years in between like series 1 and series 7, which we're going to be talking about, which is insane to kind of see that green screen, like how that works, how that differs from one to the other.
It's definitely changed a lot. And speaking of technology, they had a few interesting things to sort of make it very 1987 in this. What did you think about the way they set up this look for that time period?
I can't really remember anything about it being 1987 except the fact that Jackie had a perm. Like, what else?
The big
and
phones.
the massive phone.
The phones is the big one, yeah.
Phone that was talking about, that was the very first phone call. It was like emitting the first ever phone call, wasn't it? Which I did. That was quite cool. I didn't realise that. I'd forgotten that.
I always love to see a big brick mobile phone in TV and film. It's a great like, we're in the 80s. Easy. Done. But do you know what I found most like visually shocking, and this is really lame, but it was seeing a number plate that had the letter for the year of the car at the end of the number plate.
I loved that. Because what was yours? What was your letter?
I didn't have one that old. I had a K reg, but with the letter at the front. But because this was the 80s, the letter was at the back and it was a W reg. And we're old enough that like we would have seen cars that had the previous. God, we're old, aren't we? This is making me feel incredibly old, this conversation. But
well, mine was, when I was born, 1989, the reg was E. E-reg was 1989. And it just doesn't work like that anymore. I still can't get to grips with it and you how it works. You actually have to do maths when you're looking at a number plate now to work out where it's from. I didn't even notice that, Matt. I'd forgotten that.
That one really stood out to me, but I think, you're supposed to notice the phones more than the number plate system.
I did notice the cars though, like the car radio, because they drew attention to that when they've got the song from The Streets comes on.
The Streets, yeah.
And it's like, again, that's nostalgic for us because that was like music which we listened to when we were younger. But then it's like, for them, it's the future music. So it's this really sort of interesting clash of time periods there. And I really liked that as a thing in the episode as well.
Yeah. Also, don't you think that Rose's dad got very, like, on board very quickly with the whole time travel scenario when, first of all, just with the phone, when he sees Rose's mobile and he's like, oh, is that a phone? Oh. And then you do see the massive brick and you're like, that's a bit more of than just if that's what you thought a phone looked like. And then when he realizes, or you know, when the penny drops about Rose, he completely buys it straight away, doesn't he? Which is quite unusual.
Yeah, I clocked that. He's just like, you're my Rose, aren't you? Oh my God, you are my Rose. It's like, I don't know. I think that's just you've only got so much time in an episode, and you've got to write away.
I found that really endearing. I thought that was a really like nice. I was surprised. I thought that he'd put up a bit more of a fight about it. But I guess in the same way that people walk into the TARDIS and they're like, "Oh, it's bigger on the inside." It's like his kind of. It's like, okay, they've said that, and then they come to terms with it fairly quickly, sort of thing. It's like his little shortcut was the fact that, I don't know, just that innate instinct that she was his daughter. I thought that was quite a nice, that the instinct was quite a lovely thing in an episode that is then so much about bats and blah blah. Like that kind of instant love connection was really special. Yeah,
it is quite good. It reminds me a little bit of in a weird way, it reminded me of Back to the Future when Marty's mum at the last minute doesn't kiss him because she's like a bit grossed out.
She does kiss him, doesn't she?
Oh, she does kiss him, but then she's immediately grossed out and she doesn't want to do anything else. And it's that idea that there's just like this intrinsic link that, like, you know, you can feel who your family are emotionally and in your heart. And then, so in this case, it kind of like solves a problem in the narrative, which is that he just understands very quickly.
Yeah, because they lent into that as well because they depict him as a bit of a womanizer as well. And first thing Rose says is like, don't even think about me like that.
Yeah.
You physically can't. It's never going to happen. No.
Yeah. She's very, very clear about that. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Because it's a little bit, it's a bit gross, a bit weird.
I think he left me.
What, a pretty girl like you? If I was going out with you...
Stop! Right there.
I'm just saying.
I know what you're saying, and we're not going there. At no point are we going anywhere near there. You aren't even aware that there exists. I don't even want to think about there, and believe me, neither do you. There, for you, is like the Bermuda Triangle.
Another thing which was a bit weird is they do the whole thing with doubles and time paradoxes, and like if you meet your past self, you can't interact with them because it causes all sorts of like time malfunctions. What did you think about the way they sort of had that? Because they've got doubles in the moment where they go back and there's the car crash. And then you've also got the case where you've got Rose and you've got Rose as a baby. So they're both sort of like two interesting cases they've put in here.
Yeah, because when Christopher Eccleston was like, oh, you can't let us see ourselves, as is the case with so much time travel stuff. There is that element of like, but why not? Because he's a Time Lord. He knows probably what will have just happened. He's not an idiot. So it's not like, oh, you might try and kill yourself or you might think there's something crazy going on. This is literally your life. This is your job. It's you know what this is. And then, but then the Rose meeting herself thing was, she does say to him, doesn't she? I'm not an idiot. I know I can't do this, but obviously that doesn't go in enough, and she holds herself as a baby. But also, like, I don't know. Yeah, I'd kind of love to see myself as a baby, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you be right up for like meeting your toddler self or your baby self?
I've literally never thought of it before.
Think about it now, Matt. I'm asking you.
Sure. Shake his hand. Say, pleasure to meet you, young man.
Shake his tiny baby hand.
Keep up the good work.
Back to your mum now. See you later.
If it was a time travel film, I'd be like, back to my mum. I mean, your mum.
Oh. But again, I think that messes with the rules, because I'm sure even in a later episode, I can't remember which one, there is another instance of someone meeting themselves. Maybe Rory meets himself older, or I don't know.
That's in one of the episodes we saw, yeah. And they've made loads of fun out of having the Doctor meet another version of the Doctor. So he's met himself loads of times.
If that's going to tear a rift in the universe, I just think, yeah. So that was a bit of an odd one. And it wasn't like a huge rift, was it? It was just another bat, right?
It was a paradox, and a paradox disrupts the timeline, and disruptions to the timeline are what these bats feed on. So it just made them stronger. I don't think it like let anything in. It's just they are more strong. They're feeding off time energy. It's very vague, but I think that's what was going on.
I love a paradox. I really like paradoxes because you can just throw anything at it and just blame it on a paradox, and you can get away with absolutely everything. And in the world of Doctor Who, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a paradox. It's cool.
They always confuse me. We've come across so many different paradoxes in this series, and every time I'm just like, Matt, can you explain this a bit more for me?
Doctor Who's paradox rules are kind of just like when a paradox happens, it's just like, blip, it's done, reset button.
Yeah.
We're back to some other point in time.
So what? So he had to die, right? Rose's dad had to die because what? Because later on down the line there would have, because they change history quite a lot. So like later on down, like when they show like Van Gogh his own work in the present day, like surely,
yeah,
that would have messed with something. So they've had to kill off Rose's dad again because he does actually come back later on. So you could maybe sort of argue that he had to die here for a reason, that he had to come back later on, right?
Yeah, I don't know if we get like a good reason on it, but one thing that I noticed looking back across these episodes is that a fairly consistent rule, such as consistent rules exist in Doctor Who. One of them is that like you can mess with the past, you can show Van Gogh his own paintings, but you can't mess with your own past. That's like special, and that's more serious. And if you do that, that's a problem. And no further explanations than that. And the Doctor can do it because he's the Doctor, but nobody else can mess up their own timeline.
But she does, doesn't she? Rose changes her timeline because she makes it so that her dad was with her in his last moments and dies somewhere else, outside the church.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the rules are not consistent.
I suppose the big outcome is that he died, and that was that. And she was only with him in her present, not in her past. So I guess nothing had actually changed for her in the past.
Well, there's the bedtime story that she gets told.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yes, that is true.
But I guess ultimately the idea is that time has been restored to closer to the original timeline, and there's therefore less paradox energy for the bats to be strengthened by, and then they all just disappear.
So the bats are pretty rubbish, let's be honest. But let's talk about a villain in Doctor Who which is a lot better and also feeds on time. Let's talk about angels. Let's talk about Blink.
The angels are coming for you, but listen, your life could depend on this. Don't blink. Don't even blink. Blink and you're dead. They are fast, faster than you could believe. Don't turn your back. Don't look away, and don't blink. Good luck.
How cool was it to rewatch this episode? I think I've only seen it once.
I love this episode so much. I think it's one that everybody always goes to, don't they? And it's the one with the least Doctor in, which is a bit harsh, but it's such a perfect little one-off episode. So if somebody isn't into Doctor Who, this is the episode you show them, because you don't need any backstory at all. And also you're bringing in Carey Mulligan, who hadn't hit the heights of her fame at that point. But I think just to have the insight into knowing that she was going to be a bloody big deal and to give her pretty much her own episode was very, very clever. Because it really paid off, right?
Yeah, she's a strong choice to lead an episode that doesn't have a lot of David Tennant to be the character that you tune in to watch every week. I also think Finlay Robertson, who plays Larry Lawrence in this, I also thought he was really good they had great chemistry, him and Carey Mulligan. They were kind of bouncing off each other a lot. And yeah, I think everyone remembers Carey Mulligan because she became a huge star after this. But yeah, definite props to Finlay Robertson for filling out the rest of the cast.
You're right, he was good. He was very natural in it, which was really nice. I think about this episode quite a lot. And I always remember that the lovely policeman and that whole exchange. This has so much emotional heft in it. Actually, so does Father's Day, actually. I cried in that. I think all the kind of grief and trauma in that, there isn't really anywhere for it to go, though, because you kind of feel like you're left. She's left with it because he still dies. And in this, the grief kind of manages to seep out. You can come to terms with it in the same way that Sally Sparrow does, with all of the interactions that she has with people who then die in the past. And it's an incredibly heartbreaking, devastating way of dying, but the Doctor says it, he sums it up in a really nice way. Matt, you'll probably be able to paraphrase it better than I can.
He says that the angels, he says something like they're the only monsters that kill you nicely.
Yeah, the psychopaths who kill you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It gives you a different timeline. It gives you a different outcome. It gives you a different fate. And it might not have been the one, but actually the two that we see in this are actually, they have quite lovely lives, don't they? They manage to find partners, and I don't know. I think there is something really lovely about this episode.
Yeah, it's a weird kind of duality that they do with it, because the angels themselves are terrifying. They're so scary, and they're iconically scary. They're, as far as baddies that are created for the revived series of Doctor Who, they have to be the best one. They're not, they can't match the Daleks and the Cybermen and all of that, but this is a new creation, and they're so scary. And the initial thing that they do to you is really horrifying and terrible. The idea of coming to terms with, oh, I live in 1920 now and there's no way for me to get back. That is horrifying. But then, yeah, you're right. Like you said, the characters that we see that happen to, we then get a rush of them having this nice, happy life and living and dying of natural causes at an old age and had this fantastic life. It's very strange the way they pair those two things up. But I think it's what makes the episode so memorable and so good. It's one of the things anyway.
Because they take their potential life, don't they? Their potential energy, and that's what they're feeding off, which is like a really interesting concept. Like a lot of the times in time travel, you go like, oh, if only I'd done that, or if only I'd done things like this, and then you go back in time. This is sort of like they're feeding off all of that potential energy, and that's how they're surviving. I think that's like just a fascinating use of time travel, and what an amazing concept to have come up with.
And
for
I suppose the most obvious example of that is the potential date that Sally and the hot doctor DCI or whatever he is, I don't want to say, is it Shipman?
Billy Shipton.
Shipton. I was like, he doesn't have the same name as a serial killer. Shipton. Yeah, the potential date that Sally and Billy could go on, that is what they feed off. And it's like, oh my God, there was so much. And you just think, they spark immediately. Look at that potential. Like if that was your meet cute, you'd be like, oh, this might have legs. That thought is what the angels feed off, which is a very, very cool idea.
Yeah, and it works nicely in a kind of, in terms of structuring the episode, because he's set up as like the romantic interest for Sally, and you feel that as the audience. Like you said, it is a meet cute, so you've then got expectations for what these characters are going to do and how they're going to feel for each other, and then it's just like the rug's torn out from under you.
You never see him again.
And he's an old man.
Yeah, you never see that actor young again. And yeah, it's very, very cruel, but very, very clever. And that does make it very, very memorable as well. But also the wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey ball of whatever, like that phrase, I don't know if they knew at the time that phrase has become like one of the most iconic Doctor Who lines, and it's one that even if you don't watch Doctor Who, you know that line. I feel. I
think we've quoted that a few times this series, haven't we, James? Yeah.
definitely quoted that one.
What I thought was interesting was that it is iconic, and it just works so perfectly for the character because it's got that wacky side to him. It shows that he's this quite silly, eccentric guy who will say something like that to describe something so grand and important in his life. But it's also like a real window into how he actually sees time, because yes, it's a silly description, but we're learning that the Doctor doesn't even perceive time in a linear fashion, and he has to live his life explaining to other people. It's like, no, it's not really like cause and effect and all that.
It's like in The Good Place, when they have... do either of you watch The Good Place? What do they call it? And it's a Jeremy Bearimy, and that's how they describe it, because it looks like if you write the word Jeremy Bearimy, that's how like the afterlife works or whatever. And I watched that and I was like, that was 100% nicked from Doctor Who. Just that sort of concept of it being like a really stupid thing, but actually you can kind of, as a mere human, you can sort of get where they're coming from, I guess.
Yeah, it's helpful for us as the audience to just try and conceptualize something that's difficult to imagine. And then you also get this window into the Doctor's life, because he has to spend his whole life explaining to people who can't conceptualize how to see time. And so he's like, it's a nice little bit of interaction between us and the Doctor, us as the audience and the Doctor.
And I really like the time travel. I really like the time travel element here, because the time travel only happens at the very beginning of, when the angels do this, and then the rest of it is just them living out their life. And so that isn't time travel at all. It's just living for 50 years and then waiting to meet Sally again, or to write her a letter that then your grandson is going to give her. And that whole idea of it has to be at this exact moment in time and space is because they can't time travel. So it has to be so precise. And this is what happens when there isn't a TARDIS around, because they've lost it. We never really find it. There's no reason for that, right? They're just stuck without... Oh, the angels have done something with it, but...
Well, haven't the angels sent the Doctor and Martha back to the 60s? Haven't they been zapped?
Without
And that's why they haven't got the TARDIS? No, that can't be right, because then how would they get out of 1960s?
Well, this is what
Yeah, because he sends he kind of sets things in motion so that Sally activates the TARDIS. The TARDIS goes back to the 1960s to the Doctor, but leaves Sally and Larry where they are.
Right, yeah. Yes. But yeah, that whole idea of it's just life playing out and not in like quite a linear way after they've been zapped back, if you see what I mean. It's not back and forth, back and forth.
But it was cool to see the Doctor having to like orchestrate a time travel adventure without having his time machine. But because he's still a Time Lord, and the Time Lords have this this perception of time just naturally, or because they look into that weird gateway that comes into it a bit later that I found very strange. But like he can do all of this because he's a Time Lord. He doesn't actually need a time machine to manipulate the time stream.
And he's sort of using all his like future knowledge in this case, isn't he? Because he knows that Sally Sparrow is going to be there at that point, and he knows that he's got to get the DVD extras sorted out, so they're all the Easter eggs, so they have the clues later on. So he's sort of planning all this out in advance, using what he knows about the future, and it's interesting seeing that play out in itself. And I kept thinking it was like Back to the Future as well. That, especially the letter, is how Back to the Future Part 2 ends. So it's nice having little moments like that, but then they kind of updated it with the DVD Easter eggs and stuff. So there's lots of like really good bits in there.
With the DVD Easter eggs as well. I mean, first of all, I think that was the first time I ever found out what an Easter egg was in a like I just didn't know about that until then. And also DVDs dates it so massively as well. Having that, speaking about 1987 being dated, this was 100% dated because of the DVDs. And I liked, it's a fun episode. Remember there's that line right at the beginning when they're talking about Sparrow and Nightingale, and Sally's a bit ITV. And I just I love that little kind of like throwaway gag. But also, yeah, I think the what you were saying, James, about the Doctor having all of this knowledge and how to set everything up, I think they do in a really, when he's got that transcript in front of him, and you the way that they set that out, that drip feeds you these bits of information, and the fact that we're seeing it through this nerd, this guy Larry, and that also, by the way, is completely taking the piss out of, nerds like Doctor Who nerds as well, which I think is really nice. It's kind of like not taking the piss out of, but sort of saying, we see you, we know what you're up to, in the joke. Yeah. I think it's just very, very clever, but also really satisfying to see that play out in real time when they've got the script and he's like, I've got this transcript in front, look to your left. And she's like, oh my God, it's you're writing down what I'm saying. And that's what he's got. And just that whole little triangle thing is so satisfying. It's such a perfectly formed episode. I love it.
Yeah, that's really good. And the bit before is very Back to the Future, but this bit with the transcript and a lot of the concepts of what the Doctor is doing, to me, really reminded me of like an extended version of what they do in Bill and Ted, where they just say to themselves, after all this is over, I'm just going to use my time machine, get the things I need, and dump a trash can on my dad's head so we can escape, or put the recorder in the police station. They just say, we'll do it later, we'll sort it out later. The Doctor's just doing an incredibly elaborate version of that. It's just, when I get my TARDIS back, I'm going to get these transcripts. I'm going to teach this guy how to get into the publishing industry and how to do Easter eggs, all of that. He's setting all of that in motion, just knowing that, like, I'll be all right. I'm going to get my time machine, and then I can just sort all this out later.
And it's all really random in the first place because Sally gives him that pack with all the information in that she's been making just in like a chance encounter. So it's like, it's such an interesting sort of time loop that they've created with this episode. It's so tightly put together. They've really thought out every sort of bit of the time travel, and all the rules match up. Whereas like we said, a lot of the Doctor Who episodes, they kind of go all over the place with their time travel. But this is really sort of like, it's nicely packaged.
Absolutely. And even from the point of how does he know where she's going to rip the wallpaper off to write the thing? Well, presumably he saw where she'd already ripped it and so knew that's where he had to write it in the first place at the beginning. You know, all those little things that it's so good. And also it was directed by Hetty McDonald, who did Normal People quite recently. And she's just a beautiful director. Yeah, I just think that was really, really cool. I didn't realise that she'd done that episode.
I haven't seen Normal People yet, but I know that it's been doing really well, hasn't it? It's been all over the news and stuff.
Yeah, it's a really lovely series. It's a very human series. And she also did Howard's End, which was a beautiful adaptation. And I think just the idea that she's a director who can bring in like a sort of very human, I don't know, like everydayness into something that is so extraordinary. I think she's really good at doing that, and doing that in sci-fi is quite difficult, and I think she absolutely achieves it here.
Yeah, it just goes to show, like, you need that kind of like normality in these stories to really identify with them and sort of like go along for the journey, because it's all good, all well and good having like flying bats and stuff, but you need to have it grounded in some sort of human emotion. And I think Angels Take Manhattan, the other Angels episode we looked at, definitely has all of that in there as well, because essentially it's like a love story, isn't it? It's got all of that stuff in there. So let's talk a little bit about that episode then.
What is going to happen to me? What is physically going to happen?
The angels will come for you. They'll zap you back in time to this very spot 30, 40 years ago. And you'll live out the rest of your life in that room until you die in that bed.
Yeah, Angels Take Manhattan it's bigger, isn't it? It's bigger than this. Like we were saying, this is such a lovely, tight little episode, and Angels Take Manhattan just takes that idea and goes massive with it, where we literally have the Statue of Liberty being one of the weeping angels, which is insane. I actually rewound that bit because I almost missed it, and I was like, hold on. Yeah, but it's also a bit like BBC does Manhattan. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, this is from a period of Doctor Who where they were really, really pushing for the American audience, because I think it had got quite big on BBC America, or it had gained an audience, and then for a few years you would just see like a few episodes here and there that would be set in America, or there'd just be American characters. There was that Christmas episode that Peter Capaldi did where he was interacting with like an American superhero, and it just felt incredibly strange and bad.
There was one Matt Smith one where I think they're in an American diner, and it was like a really big episode. And I remember stuff like that. They had properly gone for that American audience.
That's the series that follows A Christmas Carol that we'll talk about later. And yeah, I think that was when they were really going for it by then. But like the whole series has that like American arc, because he gets shot in America, so they have to keep coming back to like Nevada or wherever it was.
Yeah, they were in the middle of a desert, weren't they, at one point for quite a long time? Yeah. And River is very kind of predominant in those episodes as well, and she comes into it in this one, which I'd completely forgotten she was in Angels Take Manhattan. But I kind of like, again, it's a little bit similar to Blink, where we start the episode with the Doctor reading this book, and then things are happening as they're reading it. It's that sort of almost like they're dictating what's happening, which is, it's kind of got that similarity with the script that's in Blink. But I kind of liked that, and I kind of liked the idea that I didn't really make any sense that the fact that it was written down in the book meant that it had to happen. But when he's like, Amy read it in a book, which means that I have to break it, and you're like, are they talking about a vase? What are they talking about? And then it's her wrist, it's her hand. And that's like such a awful kind of realisation about the cause and effect of that, I don't know, of Amy reading something in a book.
I actually really like that. I thought that was really well done, because it tracked nicely with the idea in Father's Day that you can't mess around with your own timeline. And because it was a book, but it was a book that was basically based on true events, because they knew about Rory getting the coffees and all of that, so it became like an artifact of history, not just like a pulp novel. It was like a document of their real lives. So that became, I like this concept that like it became the official history of them, so that it was really a dangerous document for them to be reading.
Yes, but obviously it couldn't have been like her reading it made it so that she had to write it in the first place. Like it hadn't been written by the time she was reading it. I think what had happened hadn't happened yet. So it was like she was...
Well, it happened in 1938, so it had already happened.
But they took the book back with them from the future into the past. And then when she's reading it at that moment, it's like, it hasn't been written yet.
Right.
Yeah. When she
Because
says that
River
bit about
reads-
breaking it, it's in the present day.
I love all that kind of stuff with Doctor Who, though. You're trying to track down where things happened at what point. I think the fact that River's in this episode is really good as well, because she is one of the most interesting characters to do with time travel, because her whole story is all told out of sequence. Like, the first time you see her, you don't really know who she is, and you find out more and more about her in random episodes throughout until you find out sort of like the big reveal, which I'm not going to mention now just in case anyone hasn't watched all of Doctor Who, which is quite possible. But there's
Wait,
lots
you're
of
not
stuff
doing
you find-
spoilers for something that was out like a decade ago.
Yeah, but you know, some people might have just dipped in and out of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you find out more and more about her character throughout. And I think she's just such a great example of like time travel storytelling.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the fact that everything she does is so interesting and different and weird and just so unexpected. And, you know, anytime there's an enigma or someone mysterious, it's usually River, but I never think that it's going to be River. Do you know what I mean? Like, it surprises me every time. Like I said, I'd forgotten she was in this, but I think she's brilliant. I love Alex Kingston, who plays her. I saw her on a tube once and I told her how much I loved her, which was so embarrassing, but she's, it was awful and I immediately regretted it. But River is a brilliant idea, whoever came up with her, because she can just drop in. She, like, the rules don't really apply, or it doesn't even matter if, you know, they don't make sense, because you know at some point something will have happened either in the distant future or past that makes it make sense. You kind of buy that with her character because nothing is linear with her, which is very cool.
Yeah, the arc they do with River and the Doctor over the like 5-6 series that she's in it.
Yeah. It's a long
It's
game,
really good.
right?
I think the only problem I had with River in general is that it just takes so long to get that resolution that, like, I don't know, I did find myself like forgetting what was going on with River when she would pop up. I was like, what's her deal? Like, she's got that thing, and then she's going to that, and then her parents and all that. Like, they tried to get a lot of content out of it, and yeah, it could have resolved a bit quicker.
Your book, which you haven't written yet, so we can't read.
I see. I don't like the cover much.
But if River is going to write that book, she'd make it useful, yeah?
Well, I'll certainly try. But we can't read ahead. It's too dangerous.
I know, but there must be something we can look at.
What, a page of handy hints, previews, spoiler-free?
Chapter titles.
So like I said at the start when we were talking about this episode, it's like essentially two sort of love story bits, isn't it? Because there's the whole thing between the Doctor and River, and then there's the thing between Rory and Amy. And the Rory and Amy story is really sort of like the crux of this. And it is their big sort of emotional episode, isn't it? Because it's their exit from the series.
I know. It's a really heartbreaking ending, because the number of times it feels like Rory especially has died in Doctor Who, and keeps coming back and keeps bouncing back, and literally they jump off a building together, and it's a really tender, sweet moment, and then they come back and you're relieved and everything. And then just like that, just with the touch of an angel, they're both dead, and we find that out through their names being etched on a gravestone. And it was a really difficult way of saying goodbye to Rory and Amy, considering we've had so many opportunities to in the past, done in really kind of, I don't know, overt and like complex ways, and this was just so simple, and it was devastating in its simplicity, I think.
Yeah, it's quite cruel storytelling, isn't it, to do your characters over like that. I was a bit disappointed with it, to be honest.
And it's like it's the impact it has on the Doctor as well, because he's lost his companions at this point. And again, we talked about how he's like a lonely character. He's constantly having to travel around on his own, and then he meets people for a bit and then they go. So it really has that sort of like weight to it as well.
Yeah, he doesn't like goodbyes, and he barely gets one in this, does he? For Amy, and considering what was that? They'd been together for a really long time by that point, it feels like, and they'd been through so much together, and she hadn't, you know. I think what's very appealing and what's very endearing about Amy is her love for Rory. But in that moment, she had no space for the Doctor and no space for her daughter. And that was quite odd and a bit frustrating when, like we've been saying, they've been through so much all together in so many different ways, so many different universes. They've been split up and torn apart and put back together again. And I absolutely believed at that point that Amy would have done that for Rory. But it just, because she'd done it so many times previously when he died or she died, or, you know, but it just didn't feel real that was the very end, because we've seen it so often and because we didn't get this emotional climax.
I suppose it's like when we were talking about Blink and how those characters lived happy lives in the past. That's what presumably happened to Rory and Amy. They got to live out that life together, just in a different time period, but they don't show it, so you don't really you don't have that like emotional resolution. You don't know they got their happy ending. You just see a gravestone and the Doctor, and then it's like, oh, this is pretty grim.
Yeah. And also, does that mean that, like, why would that mean that he couldn't go back and see them again? I know he couldn't go back to New York, but that didn't mean that he couldn't track them down somewhere else. Like, didn't mean that, or did it mean that they just stayed in that house? That's what I didn't understand about this episode, when they were like, this house is where all these angels are and everybody, and they're going to be zapped back to this particular house. You're going to die in that bed. That was you dying. All of that kind of stuff. Was that still in play even after the paradox?
No, I think that the paradox is like the idea is they're going to create a paradox by not allowing Rory to. So Rory's seen his own future, and as we know, that's now set in stone. But River...
Was that a pun on the angels?
I know it wasn't, but yeah, very nice.
That's good.
But because River's such a even more like bombastic character than the Doctor at times, she's like, no, just don't worry about it. Let's create a paradox. Why not? Give it a go. And I think the idea is that the paradox successfully destroyed the angels in New York and their battery farm of humans and all of that, which is why it does feel a little bit cheap, because the angel that gets them at the end, the Doctor's like, oh, it's one that got away and it's very weak. It's like, oh, okay, there's one left. Like, I don't know, it's a bit of it feels like a bit of a rip off. And yeah, you're right, and we don't get to see don't get to see them grow old in the past, which would have, I don't know, soften the blow a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen them both with prosthetics and are done up to be like they're on death's door, like, or 90 or whatever before. So we've almost had it too often with those two in particular for this just to be it. But I guess if they'd done it again and we had seen it, we'd have been like, well, we've kind of seen this. So maybe they couldn't really win with Amy and Rory, because I think they had done it once too often. I remember thinking that when I was watching it years ago, when Rory kept dying, and I was just like, I don't think I can go through this anymore. This is getting really stupid.
I mean, the ending is memorable, and you do sort of like see how that affects the Doctor in the next few episodes afterwards. Like, he goes down a bit of a darker route, and it's got that impact to it. So I can see why they did it. And like, I still remember this for that, like the suddenness of it, and watching it for the first time being like, wait, did that just happen?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, I think, writing the companions out of the show, isn't it? Because like we talked about earlier, when he regenerates, it needs to have the same impact as a main character dying, because the actor's leaving the show. For the same reason, like every time they have to move on from a companion, there's limited ways you can write a companion out of the show other than killing them off, that's going to give the right emotional heft for the audience. And they messed around too much, like you said, with Rory and Amy, by particularly Rory killing him like 5 times before this episode. They got themselves into a bit of a muddle there. And then, yeah, I mean, what do you do with companions to get rid of them, if not kill them? Or I think Rose gets sent to an alternate dimension.
She gets to live out her life with the Doctor.
Oh yeah,
which is
really
that's a
really
nice.
good ending.
That's one of the best endings. Yeah. That always makes me happy when I think about that.
Where does Martha go? Because is it Martha or Marcia?
Martha, poor Martha, I feel like gets quite a rough deal because I don't think they gave her particularly memorable episodes. And also I think, like, for example, like the Blink one, she's barely in it. And, you know, poor Martha. I thought she was a really good companion, actually, but I think she was done a disservice by the show.
I think another really bad disservice is Catherine Tate's character, who she doesn't get killed off, but she gets all her memories of being with the Doctor wiped out of her brain. I think that's really harsh because I really liked her. I think most fans don't like her very much, but I thought she was good. I thought she was good fun.
She was. And I think her arc was brilliant. I think the journey that she goes on is terrific. It really is. And also what it means to her to be the companion. I think it means almost like the most out of all of these people because she doesn't seem to have a huge amount else. And so it's just like to then rip that away from her, for her to never know all of those incredible things that she did and the impact that she made and the life that she had is, you're right. It's a horrible ending for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Companions don't get a good deal when they leave.
The Doctor's also had like a few sort of like love interests with various different companions and sort of like various different people as well. So I think that's a good time to sort of like talk about.
It's a good seg. It's a good segue.
James is so good at segues.
So good at segues.
Let's talk about the girl in the fireplace then.
It is customary, I think, to have an imaginary friend only during one's childhood. You are to be congratulated on your persistence.
Brunette. Well, goodness how you've grown.
And you do not appear to have aged a single day. That is tremendously impolite of you.
Right, yes, sorry. Listen, lovely to catch up, but better be off. Hey, don't want your mother finding out you're the strange man, do we?
Strange? How could you be a stranger to me? I've known you since I was 7 years old.
Yeah, I suppose you have. I came the quick route.
Yes. This was so erotic, this episode.
Madame de Pompadour.
Did you guys know who Madame de Pompadour was? I had to Google it.
It's really bad. I probably should know, but I didn't. Too busy watching Sci-Fi.
As long as we all didn't know, then there's no shame. No shame here.
Rhianna's staying quiet because she blatantly knew.
I mean, I've heard of her.
Okay.
I don't think I had the first time I watched this episode, to be fair, which was a long time ago. So, you know, I didn't know her then. It's a great episode. I'm really glad you picked this one. Because it's everything that's brilliant about the Doctor. It gives you everything that we love about Doctor Who because you have this love interest outside of the companion. You can see what he can do when he has a bit of a flirt, even though he meets her when she's like 12 and it's weird and creepy.
God, I'm going to get into that in a minute.
But we also see really good baddies, I think, like visually really cool ones and genuinely scary as well, the monster under the bed. And then we also have this really tragic ending, which leaves the Doctor with that really sour look on his face. I don't like it when David Tennant looks sour and angry. But yeah, it gives you everything that we love, I think, about Doctor Who. It runs the whole spectrum of emotions.
It is a good one. It is creepy, though.
It is creepy.
I mean, so we looked at the time traveler's wife, and in that episode, we had a lot of issues with the fact that he meets this girl when she's a girl, and then there's like a weird thing where she grows up to be in love with him, and that's basically what happens in this. The Doctor is like her imaginary friend, visits her when she's young, and then sees her twice when she's young, and then sees her when she's like in her 20s or a teenager or something, and then suddenly she kisses him. So it's like she's had a romantic interest in this guy since she was a little girl.
She's been fantasizing about him every single night since she was 12 years old.
Yeah. Hoping he'll pop out of the fireplace. And
yes.
Yeah, there's something weird about that. And he's a really, really old man. He's like the oldest man.
he's got form for this. I mean, there's a whole... Oh, this is early series 2, actually. So the whole romance between him and Rose is very early days. And it's going to develop between David Tennant and Billie Piper across David Tennant's run.
Yeah, because Mickey is still in this. This is like Mickey's first proper go, isn't it? Time travel.
I still can't get over the Noel Clarkson.
I know, it's weird, isn't it?
I interviewed him a couple of days ago, which was, I'd like forgotten, and then watched him in this. I was like, holy shit, I forgot he was Mickey. That's so weird.
Did you not ask him about the time that he was in Doctor Who?
Yeah, funnily enough, I didn't mention that.
It's a spaceship. Brilliant, I got a spaceship on my first go.
It's kind of abandoned. Anyone on board?
Nah, nothing here. Well, nothing dangerous. Well, not that dangerous. You know what, I'll just have a quick scan. In case anything dangerous.
Yeah, so Mickey's still in the picture, so he hasn't really had that romance yet, but he's going to. We know that because we've seen more, and he's 900 years older than Rose. That's already weird because of that age gap, even though it doesn't look it on screen. But also they're going to come back to it later, like Matt Smith's Doctor's friendship with Amy when she was a little girl. Like they're really playing down the romance between the Doctor and the companions by that point in the show. So she's not really a love interest, and Rory's there to like reinforce that like she is not a love interest for the Doctor. But it's still kind of weird, like hanging out with little girls in their back garden when you're a 900-year-old man or any man.
Yes, but he's feeding off her potential. He knows what she could become. He's basically an angel.
That still sounds very creepy, the way you just described it.
And he gets referred to as an angel in this, doesn't he? That's what Madame de Pompadour calls it.
Yeah, he does.
My angel.
It reminded me a little bit of the way the Star Trek franchise kind of celebrates Captain Kirk. But I guess Doctor Who is literally, he is the main character, so they've got more right to celebrate their main character in this way.
I got over the weirdness pretty quickly because I think they make a really hot couple, and I thought I really I really liked that she... I think that she kind of puts him a bit on the back foot, and not many people can do that with the Doctor. And she genuinely surprises him and delights him, and he's suddenly realizes that he's being like courted by someone in time that he's clearly got a massive crush on and has just never met. He knows everything about her, and has suddenly comes to the realization that she fancies him, and he goes all giggly and gooey about it, which I think is really adorable. I really like that. And David Tennant can get away with it because he has got that boyish charm, but because he's also got the gravitas when he needs it. So I think it's really, and I think she's because we're told that she's so clever and accomplished, you could see Rose hating her, but the fact that they don't set them as against each other or enemies, they have a really nice scene where Rose has to go and try and explain what's happening, and she's like, look, I get it, you don't have to patronize me, I'm going to understand what you're going to say. And so I think Rose gains respect for her, and then vice versa. She comes on the ship, and they have a really nice moment together as well. And I really love that they don't try and play these two women off against each other who are both have a bit of a thing for the Doctor, because it very easily could have gone down that route, and that would have been lazy. But that's why I think it really works, and I think that's why we're really on her side as well. That we're quite up for Doctor having a little bit of fun before he gets with Rose a bit later on. I mean, I was always rooting for them, really, but it's a really nice moment for him, I think, to have a genuine crush on someone and for it to almost go somewhere.
I like the idea that his crushes are like these famous women of history, because Mickey mentions that he refers to Cleopatra as Cleo, like he thinks something's gone on there. Like it works really well for the character that like his crushes would be like all of the most famous, powerful women in history.
Yes. Later on in another episode, he gets engaged to Marilyn Monroe in an episode we talk about in a minute. Yeah. Like he really knows how to pick his women, doesn't he, throughout history?
When you've got access to all of time and space, you can have a very high standard.
Yeah, it's true.
Speaking of time and space, the way they've sort of like constructed the time travel in this, I thought was really good, because the spaceship itself is like a mini time machine, isn't it? Well, I say mini time machine, it's a pretty big time machine. But it's got like, you see that room from different years and stuff, and they're trying to sort of like, I quite like the whole idea about this ship and the fact that I think they say it's a 51st century ship stalking a woman from the 18th century. And the way the ship is laid out to have that one room, that like observation room of her like fireplace, and then there's like another bit where you can see another part of the room. I just thought that whole sort of like spacing was really good and really interesting. What did you guys think about that?
Yeah, I loved that. I loved the way that we see through a fireplace and we see all the modern day technology and, you know, the fire extinguisher. And then we go into pre-revolutionary France and it is exactly as you'd hope and imagine. And it's gorgeous and opulent. And I suppose, being on spaceships quite a lot with the Doctor, you don't see that opulence so often. And the set design for this is brilliant, as are the monsters. The monster under the bed. It's so cool and terrifying.
Yeah. The monster's got 2 layers of cool and terrifying as well, because you've got the mask, the 18th century kind of masquerade mask with the curly wigs and all of that, but with the fixed, terrifying expression, which is great, and it looks amazing. And then there's the reveal of the clockwork droids underneath.
Yeah, which is very, very cool. And like the bits that come out of their hands, and they can just have like saws one minute and little things the next. Like they're just really cool, interesting technological feats, I think. And I really like it when you kind of juxtapose 2 totally different things in one, which Doctor Who does very well. And I think it does it best in episodes like this, where you just see these 2 things meeting and it makes no sense and you would never see it anywhere else. And it's, yeah, gorgeous.
The Doctor's reaction to these amazing things is great in this episode as well. Like, he's completely enamored with the clockwork of the droid, because he's a Time Lord. Of course he loves clockwork. He's so impressed by it.
Yeah, that's true.
He says it's beautiful. Like, he's looking at a piece of art, but he's willing to dissect it. And also you were talking about the opulence of the set design and all of that. He's completely, blown away by seeing an 18th century fireplace. He's like, it's not a recreation. This is a real 18th century France fireplace. He's like, these little details of history or technology really like light a fire in the Doctor that's really like exciting to see.
And the fact that their clockwork as well obviously feeds back into all the time stuff. And then like in every single time travel film we've looked at, there's been some sort of clock in there somewhere. So you have to have sort of like a direct sort of visual of clocks and stuff in a lot of these time travel things. So they've really thrown that in deliberately, and it works really well in this one.
What's going on, Doctor?
Rose? They're gonna chop us up. Just like the crew, they're gonna chop us up and stick us all over their stupid spaceship. And where's the Doctor? Where's the precious Doctor now? He's been gone for flipping hours, that's where he is.
You are compatible.
Well, you might want to think about that. You really, really might, because me and Mickey, we didn't come here alone, no. And trust me, you wouldn't want to mess with our designated driver.
Yeah, this is almost a perfect episode. I mean, a lot of people cite this as one of the best episodes of the series, which is one of the big reasons why we picked it for this episode. The only thing I was a little bit disappointed by was right at the end, he goes back to see her, and we have this like tragic ending that she's died. But before that happened, it looks like the Doctor's going to be trapped in France. I don't know what you guys were thinking, but I forgot how it ended, and I was kind of hoping that he really would be trapped in France and that he was just going to have to wait 3,000 years. Is it 3,000, 5,000 years? And then just like make his way back to the spaceship and catch up with Rose and Mickey. Because he can do that. Like, I don't know what his lifespan is, but they make up the rules as they go along. Like, I was kind of hoping he'd have this like sexy fling in France, and then he'd just pop up on the ship like, oh yeah, I just hitched a ride. It took me 3,000 years, but
oh my
god,
good to see you. No, that would have been awful. I'd have hated that. It would have made me really sad, because it's not what he would have wanted. He doesn't like being stuck in one place. He's too much of a restless soul, right? So although he would have been enamored with Madame de Pompadour, she would have had her own shit going on with, you know, the king. And I think I think he'd have been really unhappy there. That would have been a really sad ending for him.
They do sort of up the stakes though with that as well, because the way they've got the time travel in this, they can only go to certain points. So the fact that he misses his opportunity to see her before she dies is like adds extra weight to that whole scene. So like he finally gets out and says like, I'll be back in a second, we'll go and see the stars. And then when he gets back, he's missed his chance, and he's just like, and that's it. And even though he's got a time traveling machine, he could go there, but he's sort of like, no, I can't use this fireplace. That's it.
Well, again, it's one of those vaguely consistent rules of the series, which is that when he goes back and speaks to the king, he's become part of events, and then it becomes his personal history, and he's got the letter from Renette, so he then couldn't go into a time in between those 2 points because he's existed at either end of it, so he can't disrupt his own timeline. But again, I mean, if he really wanted to, obviously the Doctor could do that, because as he says at the start of Father's Day, I can do anything.
With this episode, we see like the huge and the minute. And so the fact that the time travel just takes place over one woman's life, I think is just really intimate. And again, because with Doctor Who, you can do absolutely anything and go absolutely anywhere. And then to have the kind of constraint of it just being this one woman in this one time and only being able to go in and out of her life every so often, I think having those limits makes it a much better story. I think where Doctor Who isn't great is when it's not so tight. And I think having these rules and having these limits makes it, you know, much more consistent and makes the story have to be better, have to be tighter. And I think the next one that we're going to talk about, A Christmas Carol, is one of my least favourite episodes because it's like, I don't really understand anything that's going on. I don't understand the rules. There are no limits on this episode somehow, and so the writing, the narrative is wild, and they're throwing in like sharks and like Christmas carols and ghosts and holograms and Michael Gambon twice. It's just like, what is going on? And compared to The Girl in the Fireplace, which is just a perfect episode, it's really annoying that they can write like that and then they write like that, you know?
Well, I think you have queued up the next episode perfectly there, Rhianna.
Now, what's this then? I love this. A big flashy lighty thing, that's what brought me here. Big flashy lighty things have got me written all over them. Not actually, but give me time and a crayon. Now, this big flashy lighty thing is connected to the spire in your dome, yeah? And it controls the sky. Well, technically it controls the clouds, which technically aren't clouds at all. Well, they're clouds of tiny particles of ice. Ice clouds love that. Who's she?
Nobody important.
Nobody important. Blimey, that's amazing. Do you know, in 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before.
So, A Christmas Carol then. It's a twist on everybody's favourite first time travel story, A Christmas Carol. But like you said, it's mental. It's absolutely mad. You've got Catherine Jenkins. You've got flying fish and sharks. You've got cryogenics. You've got a weird planet that celebrates Christmas even though it's not Earth. It's got so
You've got
much...
Amy and Rory having role play sex on a spaceship.
Yes!
You've got
as what they used to be.
A spaceship plane crash. You've got a guy talking to the president. I was like, I just don't know what is happening.
Yeah, who is the president? Where is the president? What is he the president of?
He can
so
control
mental.
clouds, and therefore he is like the only person that exists of power somehow. Who knew that was all it took?
I mean, yeah.
So I don't get the chance to do this very often on this podcast, but I'm going to come out in defense of this episode. I actually really like this one. I think it's really sweet.
Do it, Matt.
Yeah.
Do it.
I think it's a really good example of something they do in Doctor Who quite often, which is that the plot can be absolutely insane and make no sense and get really, really ridiculous. But there's like an emotional core to it that you can really like hang on to and is really consistent to the character of the Doctor. And in this, it's like and it comes through in some of these episodes that like the value of a human life is so important to the Doctor, and he will take incredible risks to save one person's life. And in this one, it's he's trying to save 4,000 lives on the crashing spaceship, but he also takes this really personal interest in Michael Gambon, and wants to like figure out like what's wrong with you, why are you such a grumpy old man, and I'm gonna invest a lot of time into just changing you and making you happier. And yeah, I quite like it. It's ropey, but that kind of element of it, I think, is so. It's so key to the Doctor's personality, and it's something that I really liked about this episode.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There is that line where he says about Catherine Jenkins' character, that's funny. I've travelled the whole, history of space and time, and I've never met anybody who wasn't important before. And it's like, it's such a great, damning line. And it makes you feel a bit like, oh yeah, I'm important too. Oh good,
And Christopher Eccleston has a great moment like that in Father's Day as well, doesn't he? Because he's talking to the couple that are getting married, and they're like, oh gosh, we're not important. Sorry about all this. And he's like, don't be ridiculous. You are the most important thing in the world. You met and had drunken sex, and now you're getting married, and that is so important. Yes, I will save you. That is the Doctor to me. I love those moments, and that always holds me on to A Christmas Carol. That always makes me stick with it and enjoy it.
I mean, I didn't know what to expect in this one. I must have seen it at Christmas, like whenever it first aired, but I couldn't remember how they twisted the storyline up, because I imagine they were going to do like the Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, Future. And the way they do Christmas Past, I thought was quite interesting, because we've seen this in quite a few other films and stuff, like especially in like Frequency, where if you've got a connection to the past, you can see the impact of that in your present when you change things. So that happens in Frequency in like a number of ways, but like memories is one of the things that happens. And you see this happen to Michael Gambon's character. He's seeing this video of him and the Doctor when he was a kid, and suddenly he's getting those memories when he's watching the video and being like, oh, I remember that. And I thought that was quite like an interesting time travel thing to throw in here, and something which I don't think I've seen in a Doctor Who episode previously.
No, I was really shocked by that, actually. I was really surprised that they had included something like that. But I really liked that idea. And yes, when he's kind of going, why is this happening? He's almost like, it's not fair, because it's not really fair that Matt Smith just decided to jump back into his life and change everything about him unwillingly. But it has a really, really cool impact. I think it's a really frustrating episode, because they've just tried to throw so many ideas in, and just one of those ideas would have been really cool. Having him watching those memories on a projector is a really lovely idea. It's a very interesting way of making Scrooge a better person. And then also having then Catherine Jenkins and going back and showing her all these different Christmas Eves every Christmas Eve is one really cool idea in and of itself. But it just doesn't, I don't really understand, I still don't really understand that. And I also don't buy that the Doctor wouldn't have realised what those numbers were counting down every time he saw her, and that he was then so cavalier about it and about her last day, and had never sort of thought to ask about those dates. I just didn't buy that at all.
You know what it kind of felt like to me? It felt like a kid had written the storyline, or said like, but you know what I mean? Like, they wrote a story where they were like, it's like Christmas Carol, but there's like sharks in there, and then they ride a sleigh, but it's flying sharks and things like that. So it's got all of these, and there's like a princess who's frozen. It's like all of that kind of stuff.
I even think the mystery of the flying fish is a good Doctor Who concept in the same way. Like, if it was it's not very Christmassy, is it? Flying fish and sharks. That's the main problem there. But that could be a cool episode. They go to a planet and they've got there's this, because it's a cool image, the fish that are circling around the street
around
lamps.
the lamp.
Yeah,
it's very cool.
It looks great, but yeah, like you said, it's like a child's just mashed all this stuff together. I think we should say this is a Stephen Moffat episode. So this is the same author as the girl in the fireplace and The Angels Take Manhattan and Blink.
I feel like he just gave this to the writer's room and just took all of their ideas instead of just one and just, do you know what I mean? Like there was no filter of saying, oh, actually, I don't think we need to be at a glamorous pool party in America in this episode. Why don't we keep it a bit more local? And you've also got the fact that it's steampunk Victorian era, but not on Earth. It's on a different planet. And then Michael Gambon playing his dad as well. It's just like it was so many layers. It was just like, just strip it back a little bit and you might be onto a winner. Plus Catherine Jenkins, beautiful singing voice, not an actress.
But like that's the first thing she does. As soon as she gets unfrozen, she just starts singing.
Sings to
singing
the shark.
to the shark.
Sings to the shark. Why? Because they got a singer in. They were like, so singing has to be the crux of this, and that's the thing that's going to save us. Why? Like, it doesn't make any sense in the rest of the story except to have beautiful Christmas carols in a Christmas episode. Fine, just have that. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you
felt
mean.
Really like lazy writing.
I was really feeling that
writing.
when Amy showed up as the ghost of Christmas Present. Because you kind of, because you're like, by that point you were like, what's Amy and Rory got to do with this episode? And then she shows up. It could have as easily been the Doctor playing all three ghost roles because he does past and future. But they're just like, we'll just quickly get Amy in to do a bit of it, and then she goes away again.
Yeah.
She's a hologram.
Oh, and now Rory because we've also paid him for this.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
You guys are really breaking my heart here, tearing this one apart. Because I think this is, we didn't talk at the start, James, about how you and I got into Doctor Who and our history with it. I think this might have been one of the episodes that got me into it because I absolutely hated Doctor Who in 2005. And for years, I just thought it was terrible.
Did you? I remember having a very, very drunken conversation with you in an Uber for like an hour once about Doctor Who.
I was wondering if you'd bring that up. I remember that.
It was like you just discovered Doctor Who and it was about 3 years ago.
Well, it was like it was a slow process for me. Like I hated it, but then what got me into it was the Christmas episodes because I would go home and visit my parents. I'd be really, really drunk on wine, and then Doctor Who would come on, and I'd be just drunk enough to not get hung up on all of the things that I hated about it, that the plots didn't always make sense, and the budget wasn't very high, and it kind of looked crappy, and I would just sit there and just enjoy it. And I did that like 3 or 4 Christmases in a row, and this definitely would have been one of them. And then I was like, all right, I'm gonna get into this. I'm gonna binge watch it, and now I'm like a huge fan. So yeah, this has got a real special place in my heart, guys. This episode, and it does suck, I admit.
I will say though, it did make me laugh a lot this episode. I think that's partly down to Matt Smith and his delivery because personally, I think he's my favourite Doctor. Like I just love all of his weird little lines, and I think he delivers them so well. And I just love all that sort of quirkiness because it's my kind of humour. It's like the randomness of it. Like what he says something like, let's eat crisps and talk about girls. It's just random lines like that, which I just absolutely love. And I think that's like why I enjoyed this episode was just sort of like all those little funny bits. And then I can sort of like forgive a bit of the Catherine Jenkins singing to a shark moment with a few extra lines and stuff.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I love Matt. I love Chris Eccleston, David Tennant, Matt Smith. I think they are all brilliant for different reasons. And you're right. Having that consistency is always a better thing in an episode like this. Amy and Rory did not need to. They should have just like binned them off like they did in like that Midnight episode, and like the companions in all of the ones we've talked about haven't really been that prevalent apart from Angels Take Manhattan, and that's kind of been for the better for those particular episodes because it's just too much otherwise when you're bringing in these external characters. And Michael Gambon's history and story in this is such a big one that it doesn't really make sense for Rory, and I think the fact that Rory and Amy are on that spaceship means that we know that it's not going to crash and they're not going to die. Whereas if they hadn't been on it, then there would have been a genuine chance, because that happens a lot, that those 4,000 people would lose their lives. I mean, it was a Christmas episode, so not. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like the stakes were kind of gone once Amy and Rory were there, and we just did not need all those weird projections and her on the phone and dressed as her strippogram like uniform. It's
I didn't mind
very
that.
Strange. Oh yeah, sure. Arthur Darvill as a centurion doesn't do it quite so much for me, unfortunately.
I've sent for help. Who the hell are you? Look, there's a friend of mine, okay? And he can help us. He'll come.
And what are you wearing?
That doesn't matter.
Are you from the honeymoon suite?
Oh, shut up.
Oh, Amy! The light stopped flashing. Does that mean he's coming?
Honeymoon suite? Oh, the clothes. It is just a bit of fun.
Really? Shut up.
We've got so many things going on in this episode. It's very convoluted, but I did notice as well, like, you've got the time travel in the Ghost of Christmas Past stuff, and you've got it in this sort of like Ghost of Christmas Future stuff a little bit, but you've also got it with the cryogenics, because Catherine Jenkins is like frozen in time, and we did a episode on like cryogenics and being frozen in time when we looked at Planet of the Apes and Demolition Man, and again, that's a kind of time travel, isn't it? Because you're traveling.
Not Austin Powers?
Not Austin Powers, no. We did name check out Austin Powers, I'm pretty sure.
Good.
Yeah. I remember putting a little edit in there somewhere. But yeah, I just wanted to see what you guys felt about that as like a time travel concept in this. Like, is it a time travel concept?
I think, again, it could have been, but they didn't really do anything with that. And I think because we see that, the Catherine Jenkins family at the beginning, but we don't really understand who they are at that point or anything. And so when we go back in time to see them, do we go back in time? Yeah. Yes. Just working out the timeline. Yes. And she gets to see them on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. Once, by the way, I feel like she would have surely pushed to have seen them more. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't make any fucking sense.
She was too busy trying to get it on with Michael Gambon, wasn't she?
Yeah,
like as a young man.
He was
as a
not
boy,
attractive.
again, another
but also
young relationship thing.
This would have been like
so weird.
A few days as well, wouldn't it? So like she saw him as a little boy,
yeah,
a teenager,
and then wakes
sees him
up
a
minute later and is like, "Oh, I've got a bit of a boner for you."
Yeah, they can't show him aging 1 year at a time because they haven't got the actors to do it. But you would not be physically attracted to someone if you watched them age 1 year per day, 8 days in a row. You would not at the end of that be like, hello, you got sexy. It is very strange.
But I don't think that this really counts, because the reason that they're doing, like, they're taken as a sort of, deposit? Like a ransom almost for their family. And so it's almost like the reverse of the angels, isn't it? It's like they wake up in the future, presumably at some point when this debt has been paid off, with none of their family and nothing, and they have to start their life again in a completely different time. But we don't go into that's a really interesting concept, but we don't go into that at any point, because that would be, too good a storyline when you've got flying sharks going on.
Exactly, you've got to focus on the flying sharks.
Yeah, I think it's another thing that they just don't quite explore enough, because we see her sister is quite a fair bit older than her. But that's in the future, isn't it? When Michael Gambon's age, so.
And we also don't know how long she's been in there. Like when she goes on Christmas Eve to see her sister and she's like, let's have Christmas dinner now. We don't know how long Catherine Jenkins, but she might have been, who knows? She might be the older sister. We don't know.
So I think we're saying this episode needs a lot of red pen on the script to really tighten it up.
I think matches.
I think it's the perfect one for Christmas, though. Like you said, though, Matt, if you've had a little bit to drink and you whack this on, then
and
you
you're
can
asleep
kind of
within 3 minutes. Yeah. Perfect.
Then you're leaving the room if you're Rhianna. And, if not, you'll have a lovely time looking at the flying sharks and trying to make sense of this mad take on A Christmas Carol.
There was one bit I liked where we see a picture of young Kazran Sardic, and he's wearing like a little Tom Baker scarf. And I thought that was quite a nice little nod there. There we go. Something positive about it.
They love just having someone show up wearing a long scarf and
A stripy scarf, I know.
So like a long scarf, we're going to have to wrap this one up.
That was perfect, James. That was brilliant.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Rhianna. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you on the net if they want to listen to other podcast stuff that you do?
Well, can I give a plug? Because I've been listening to your podcast series, Rap Party, and it's absolutely fantastic, and I really, really recommend it. It's for me anyway, is the perfect type of podcast because it is so niche, and I think that's what a podcast should be, because you have this opportunity to just reach the perfect audience. So Rhianna and her co-host Michael are interviewing people who just work in the film industry who do a very specific technical role, and you're having like a long form conversation, just going in depth on those roles that they do. What are some of the people that you talked to?
Yeah, that's been really interesting. We've spoken to Joe Beanie, who edited You Were Never Really Here. He's worked a lot with Lynn Ramsey, and I mean, it's been really interesting. We've spoken to a stunt guy. We've spoken to costume designers. We spoke to Isabel Waller-Bridge, composer for Fleabag and lots of other things.
Apparently she's a big sci-fi fan.
She is a massive sci-fi fan. I texted you straight afterwards, didn't I? It was a really lovely thing. And also, we never really get to speak to these kind of behind the scenes people as much as, like, they don't get the attention that like actors, directors do. So it's nice to shine a spotlight on them. So thanks, Matt, for that plug, because I would have forgotten to plug that. Yes, Rap Party with Prime Video UK, I think is its official title. But it's not just Prime stuff. It's kind of goes back a long time. It's cool.
And where else can people find you on the internet?
I'm on Six Music every single Monday morning with Lauren Laverne, doing film and TV reviews. And I'm on Twitter at Rhianna Dhillon. And yeah, I mean, I pop up. I'm on various things. You might see me around.
Hopefully not in a weird pop-up window.
No. If you're still getting those, James, you need to. I'll give you a new browser. That won't happen anymore.
Fantastic. I will enjoy looking at that new browser. Anyway, that's it from us. As always, if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Through Sci-Fi or at Through Sci-Fi Pod. You can come and have a chat with us there.
You can send us an email at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com. Drop us a line, say hello, say nice things. Please also leave us a review if you have not done so already. Let us know in the review what your favourite episode of Doctor Who is, and we will check that out and have a look.
That's it from us. We'll see you next time.